Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend, my business partner, the ever-lovely Jason Johnston Yellen. Jason, 3 names. That's 1, 2, 3. Jason Johnston Yellen. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's been good having you. Before we started recording, you said,
yes.
Okay, you get us started, and then we're going to clear the air.
Yes.
And I've seen you clear a room before with air, but I just said...
You mean talking to my kids again?
They blame it on you, but I can't say
and I blame it on the dog. And the dog blames it on the boogie. And so it is the circle of life.
So what air are we clearing? I feel like I walked into a room. I feel like Donnie from The Big Lebowski. I feel out of my element right now.
So after completing a thorough internal investigation.
Here's the name and number of a doctor who will look at it for you. You will receive no bill. He's a good man and thorough.
That's thoughtful, but...
Please see him, Jeffrey. He's a good man and thorough.
That has included a consideration of visual evidence and corroborating statements of multiple witnesses.
My gosh.
We have come to the conclusion...
CSI Whiskey. Yeah, go on.
...that Jess Lomas got 4 out of 4 in the judgment of Westland blind tasting.
Yes.
And this aggression from Steve Hawley will not stand, man. It will not stand. So you started mentioning Donnie, and then we got to a dude quote. So there you go.
It's perfect.
God, yeah, we're just that good.
He came in hot with that.
Hot. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Burning with the heat of 1,000 suns. but yeah, and so here's the thing. So Steve Hawley's official statement on the podcast, the Judgment of Westland podcast, was his recollection was that Christopher Hallstrom Swede-Scott was the one who got 4 out of 4.
Okay, hold on. Before you go too deep in here, for those that may not have listened to the Judgment of Westland episode,
no,
there's a chance, Jason. There's a chance.
That person does not exist, Joshua. That person does not exist.
So
this is fabricated.
What Jason is talking about, in case you haven't listened to the episode, there's this thing that's called the Judgment of Westland. And it's been going on in various tastings around the country, really around the world, and with private groups, et cetera, and basically tasters are given 4 samples of whiskey, completely blind, and the sample bottles just say 1, 2, 3, 4. And there are 4 whiskeys from 4 different single malt producing countries: Scotland, the US, India, and Australia. And the judgment is taste the 4 whiskeys, and most importantly, do you feel as if they're all quality whiskeys? They all start from the same sort of level playing field, but then separately or secondarily, the question is, can you identify which one is the American one, which one is the Scottish one, et cetera, et cetera? And Jess had said she'd gotten 4 out of 4. And
she was putting the pressure on us ahead of our own blind tasting.
And on our Judgment of Westland episode, well, I would tell you what Jason and I got, but rather, why don't you go back and listen to that episode in case you haven't. And so Jess said she got 4 out of 4. Steve Hawley from Westland said, no, Jess is wrong. She got 2 out of 4. And here we are talking about this photographic evidence. So now the listener is caught up. Jason, please continue.
So Steve Hawley had made the claim that in his memory, Christopher Hallstrom, Swede-Scott, a nickname bestowed upon him from Matt Hoffman at Westland. But he thought it was Swede-Scott who'd got the 4 out of 4. And so in collecting witness statements... Christopher Hallstrom conceded under oath that he was the one who got 2 out of 4. And he said Jess got 4 out of 4 on the day.
Are Jess and Swede-Scott this Scotland-based version of you and me where people get us confused, even though we look nothing alike, sound nothing alike?
I'm going to say no.
Huh. Okay. Fair enough.
So there you go. So when the episode dropped, Jess, who is, I think, one of the, if not the number one Westland fan, and now we're going to start a fight because now Christopher Hallstrom is going to say, no, I'm the number one fan. Jess is going to say, I'm the number one fan, and we'll have another internal investigation, and we'll see what we unearth. But Jess is a fervent lover of all things Westland, and so to be questioned over the judgment of Westland was very hurtful. There's one thing I'm gonna double back to in what you had said a moment ago, which is part of the judgment of Westland is not guessing the 4 countries. We've all just taken it upon ourselves because we're hopelessly competitive to see if we can get the 4 countries. And so it's just a bonus extra. So there's no prizes, there's no awards. It's just bragging rights among your friends.
Yeah.
And so Jess has those bragging rights.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I came off saying, you know, secondarily, you know, this is the second goal, but you are right. That second goal is a self-imposed goal by any of those who, and really, it seems like the natural one, right? I think most people kind of want to know. I mean, doesn't that seem natural to say, where is he from?
But I still like Steve's point back in the episode when you and I got into trouble for trying to guess the countries before we actually judged any of the whiskies. Mm-hmm. And Steve's point is one that we've been making in plenty of tastings, which is just let the tasting speak for itself. Do you like it? Like, don't try and impress me by telling me you know the country or you could hazard a guess at the distillery. Just tell me if you like it. Mm. And we kind of skipped past that part.
Yeah, well,
we doubled back to that part.
We did.
But we kind of skipped over it.
It
was a ton of fun.
I just wish Steve hadn't dressed up in his nun's habit to wrap our knuckles after having gone against what we were told not to do.
I wish he hadn't shaken Jesse's cage because it gave me a ton of internal work to do.
Do you hear that in the background?
Is it a cage being rattled? Sabers?
It's Soundgarden's Rusty Cage.
Beats a rusty trombone, I'll tell you that much. So there you go. So we wanted to reveal the results of our internal study. We wanted to clear the air. We wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page. And now we can get back to the business of today's episode.
Really quickly before we do, I wanted to get you up to date and those that have been, or I should say those that listened to the Judgment of Westland episode. During that conversation with Steve, he had said the average score for each whiskey was 2.9 stars out of 5. So you had 1 to 5 stars, 1 being, and 1 is your baseline. Like, yeah, it's good whiskey, but it's got some flaws. 2 is it's a good whiskey I'd buy it in a bar. 3 is it's a good whiskey I'd buy a bottle. 4, it's a really good whiskey. I want Joshua to buy me 2 bottles. And 5, this is remarkable, right? So that was the range. And so when Steve had mentioned on that podcast that the average score across the 3 was 2.9, I want to let you, Jason, and our listeners know. So
you just said across the 3 was 2.9?
I meant across the 4. I just wanted to make sure you were listening.
Yep. Very closely. Yep. I'm actually transcribing this as you're saying it.
Right. For the podcast short story series you're putting out.
Actually, I'm just a hobbyist stenographer. That's it. It's as simple as that.
I wanted to let you know that
Yes.
I was scrolling through the Instagrams, which I know you're not on these days, Jason. And I was looking at our friend Dave Broom's posts, and some of these scores are now at 3.1, 3.2. So more and more people are taking the judgment of Westland blind tasting. Scores are starting to go up. And I just liked the fact that, at least when we were doing it, the baseline score was 2.9, which was pretty damn close to, I like this, I'd get a bottle. And I agree, all four of them, I liked them, I would have gotten a bottle. So
Yeah, I'm excited at the end of this judgment, whenever that is. Steve talked about getting up to maybe 3,000 participants. But I'm excited to revisit the endeavour with Steve and to take a little dive into the numbers and see what they're saying to Steve. I think that's going to be pretty cool when that happens, maybe in the new year.
Yeah, we shall see. Anyway, you were saying before I backtracked, you say, to get us to the matter at hand.
Well, I think as we're sitting here talking about world single malts, today's episode is a hop back into the rum category, which always allows us the opportunity to globetrot. And here we are today talking about Australian rum.
Yeah.
There's a little break from the norm.
A category, and we said this to Steve Magarry, and who's our guest today, Distillery Manager at Beenleigh. You know, we'd said to him that we as whiskey drinkers, and we can extend this to the majority of, us here in the U.S., don't know anything of Australian rum. Upon hearing about the distillery, I was surprised it had a history that goes back 137 years. That just surprised the hell out of me, because I think about rum, I think Cuba, right? I think Barbados, I think Trinidad and Fiji and all these islands. And I mean, granted, Australia is an island, but that's a pretty damn big island.
As you learned, it's got multiple time zones.
It does, yeah. Imagine that. So that was interesting. And, one thing I want to point out, not only were we ignorant to the fact that Australia had or has such a rich distilling rum history and sugarcane history. I mean, you and I are really coming at this interview from a certain level of ignorance on the category of rum writ large. And so, it's one of these interviews where we ask a question and then we step back and we say, please take the reins, because we just need to soak in everything you're saying. Because some of it was quite, well, I'll speak for myself and I'll let you talk here, but some of it was quite foreign to me.
Yeah. Literally and metaphorically. Did you notice he had a bit of an accent?
I almost, Jason, you baited me. I almost got into my Australian accent. You almost got me into being slightly Aussie racist. But I didn't do it, Jason. I didn't.
But what do you think? What do you think of this thing that I'm holding, though? Would you call this a knife?
It's not a knife.
I knew you could resist one time. I knew you couldn't resist twice.
I tell you, I think about this all the time. We had Adil Rafai on the podcast a few years back from the Magic Tavern, and he taught us how to speak Australian. Rise up lights. Rise up lights.
Isn't it razor blades?
Yeah, rise up lights.
Oh, I thought you said rise up lights.
Yeah, rise up lights. It's like Space Ghettos.
It is like Spice Girls. Space Ghettos is so good. It makes me laugh every time. But yeah, one of the things I will say as we transition into this interview here is we prefaced so many of our questions with, as we understand from whiskey, blah, 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 distilling, condensing, maturation, storage. And he seemed okay with that. He seemed like a pretty chill guy all the way through the interview, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to us at One Nation Under Whiskey taking these forays into other categories and saying, we are here to understand, but let me know if it's like the thing that I already know. It's almost like an easier way to attach the new knowledge onto the knowledge we already have, as opposed to just going in and saying, okay, teach me a brand new category. And I like to think of it that way also on behalf of our listeners, where our listeners are whiskey people, right? And so if we can take something that's already known amongst all of us, I think that producer then has an easier time delivering that message. And I remember when we had Richard Seal on as well, and Richard Seal did a lot of given talks, presentations, led tastings with whiskey lovers. And here's how I've kind of got them into the rum realm.
Yeah.
And so that's even a producer, an incredibly successful producer, who's doing that as he's going around the globe. So on one hand, I felt a little bit awkward when we kept doing that. On the other hand, there was an extremely valid reason for us doing it.
Yeah, I felt every time we asked the question, it was as if saying, so normally when I go to Chicago, I take this road, and this road. He's like, no, I see what you're doing there, but this is another direction I would take, right? The end goal is a fine, tasty drink. And we all start from some sort of a fermented product. Well, how do you get there?
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I looked at it. And I love that you brought up Richard Seal. So for those listeners who aren't familiar with Richard Seal, he's the man behind Foursquare, or one of many men, but him and his wife Gail are the people behind Foursquare. And so if you're interested in Foursquare rum, we actually did interview Richard. Was that last year, 2 years ago? It was during COVID, I want to say.
Yeah.
Just go back.
Have to check the archives.
Check it out. So I want to hand the conversation over to our conversation, but is there anything you wanted to add in before we let it go over to Steve?
There is, but I'm going to save it for coming out of the interview.
Oh, look at you, changing it up. Steve, thank you so much for joining us. You are now our third guest on the podcast in 5 years to discuss rum. And in a way, it makes sense because it's One Nation Under Whiskey. But at the same time, Jason and I have talked about this a few times. It also doesn't make sense because there are a lot of people who drink rum that also drink whiskey and vice versa. And, I think part of our job as whiskey lovers is to also talk about the other things that we love. We talk about mezcal all the time. That's probably the thing we talk about second most. And then we'll follow that up with rum. So my point is, you're the third person on to discuss rum. I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for helping to educate us. And so you're here from Beenleigh, and at least from an American perspective, your products aren't on American shelves. Yet you're a distillery that's been around for 137 years now. So I wonder, talk to us as someone who's never heard about Beenleigh before. Give us a bit of the history of this distillery that goes back farther than any American I know would know. 136 years seems like a great history. So I wonder if you can talk about that a little bit and how rum started in Australia.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Josh and Jason. It's fantastic to be on the Single Cask Nation podcast. It's an honour. So when we get to Australian rum, it's fascinating. Very few people, even here in Australia, realise that there's 150 plus years of Australian rum provenance. Dates back to the mid 1860s onwards. So that was when the sugarcane industry here was burgeoning. There was cotton growing here as well. Actually, in the midst of the US Civil War, there was cotton being grown here in this region. To send over to the US, to send over to the UK. However, cotton didn't grow too well in our tropical climate. And so what did grow at the time and is still today is sugarcane. And so off the back of the sugarcane industry, as we see globally, you'll always tend to see whether that's molasses rum or your cane juice, agricole style rum. So here in our area, the Beenleigh Logan district, we actually weren't the first rum distillery in this region. There's 3 other distilleries that actually date back earlier than the Beenleigh Distillery. And so at that time, it was definitely a thriving community. Agriculture, as I say, there's cotton, there was sugarcane and other crops. And the original founders of the Beenleigh estate or plantation, they originally immigrated from the UK in 1862 to this area. And so back in Devonshire, southern England, they actually came from their estate was the Beenleigh estate or Beenleigh Manor. And so they not only did they come out and immigrate to Australia, but they brought the name with them, and that's how the name has established itself here in the region, and the local city here is named Beenleigh due to that history. And so on the distillery itself, originally it was set up as a sugarcane plantation with a sugar mill, and so that was established in 1870. And so with growing the sugarcane, producing sugar here on site, and the molasses. And so at this time, in context of Australian rum, there was several other rum distilleries further north of here that were really starting to produce a large quantity of Australian rum at the time, and a variety of different distillation processes, whether it was single pot, double pot, single retort, double retort, and there was also 1 or 2 column stills at that time in our state here, Queensland. So during this era, when the sugarcane first started in the area, then it was like, okay, there was other rum distilleries at the time. So we moved to 1884 as when the actual rum distillery was established here on site. So yes, we do celebrate 137 years. We are the oldest operating distillery in Australia. We are a heritage listed site as well. But I do want to focus on just a quick anecdote. From 1869 to 1872, there was a ship going up and down the local rivers here. It was because the rivers were the main or the primary transport on and off the farms and the plantations. And so this boat was known as the Walrus. It was actually a floating sugar mill, floating distillery. So the boat would moor against the bank and take the sugar cane on, process it, create the sugar. But on the back end of the boat, they'd be having all this leftover molasses. So what would they do with it? They made rum. They had a 500-gallon pot still on the boat, and so they were producing rum. And they had a license to do so. However, what we have found over the years is very quickly they were starting to avoid the excise tax and payments, and basically original rum runners. Yeah. And so that's a great story here for the river that we're on and the local region as well. So that's what we refer to as the Walrus, is the boat. The bosun was the captain of the ship that was generating not only sugar, the molasses, but rum as well.
Wow, I can only imagine how health and safety would feel about a 500-gallon still operating on a boat nowadays. I think that would be a difficult proposition for them.
Well, talk to Luca Gagano. He wants to do it again. So I think it's more the environmental EPA context might be more a concern.
Is the still that was on that ship, do you still have it at least as a museum piece?
So we look at establishing the distillery in 1884. Now through to 1915, the sugar mill plantation was here on site. In 1915, it was shut down, relocated to another area north of here. So the distillery, as I say, has been running since 1884. In the late 1890s was severe flooding through the area here, and a lot of the original building and stills and equipment was washed away, and so that would be the still from the wars as well. And so the oldest buildings we do have on site do date back to the 1890s. The original bonded warehouse was all. It took 3 years to build. It was all handmade bricks here on site, and then laid. Wow. and built. And then within that 1890s bond store, we have, which is integral to the distillery today. We have 4 17,000-litre vats that also date back to the 1890s, and then we have 8 22,000-litre maturation vats, which have now been here over a century. They were installed in 1920. So that's just a snapshot of some of the history we have here. When it comes to the actual distillation equipment, so when in the 1890s, when one of the major floods that we had, and the distillery was rebuilt afterwards, there was another distillery further downstream here, and it had its distillery equipment was built locally here back in the 1860s, and that was that equipment that was transferred here to Beenleigh. And so that still, or two stills, a wash still, spirit still combination was in production from the late 1890s through to the mid 1970s. Wow. And so it's very, very unique stills. Originally were wooden vat stills with the bands or the hoops around the staves, copper pot, top, gooseneck, to basically a single retort with a rectifier on top, then going to a shell and tube condenser, then going to a worm tub condenser. So a real beast of a setup. And as I say, there was two of them. It was a wash still, larger volume component, and then a smaller spirit still component as well. And that product coming off that still is what's historically known as Beenleigh double pot still. And so we have those stills here still on site. The wash still, the larger one, is really a museum piece right within the middle of the distillery that operates. Hasn't been used since the 1970s, so it was mothballed 50 years ago. Almost every day we walk past it, we always ponder and think what it would take to get it up and running again. Because I've been fortunate enough to enjoy and savour some of the 1950s, 1960s era Beenleigh, and it's fantastic. It is off this old still. It is amazing. It's got real heavy, Corona type notes. It's rather unique, but there's so much there to explore. So.
Can I pause you here really quickly? I want to make sure I'm understanding this wash still. So it's the wash still. It's got the wooden pot. It's got the gooseneck line arm, and then it goes to a shell and tube condenser, and then further condensed with worm tubs.
So it's the copper gooseneck goes into a single retort, and then above that is a rectifier, which is very similar to the Port Morant rectifier from Demerara. If you get photos side by side of them, they're almost identical, and they're essentially traced back to the same coppersmith pattern out of Glasgow in the 1860s. So from the rectifier, then it goes to shell and tube condenser, and from there it goes to a worm tub.
Okay, so everything prior to the shell and tube condenser, I understand that, though in calling it back to you, I realize I missed some components. The part that I don't understand is going from one type of condensation to another type, directly into another type of condensation. I've never seen something exactly like that. I've seen it where, and again, I'm going to use whiskey as sort of the signpost here, where a distillery like, say, Springbank might have a worm tub on the wash still, and then a shell and tube condenser on the spirit still, or vice versa, something like that. But the fact that you're going from shell and tube then into worm, do you know what the reason for that was?
Yep. So when we look at when we look at the layout and the age of each component, the shell and tube condenser was retrofitted in afterwards, after the original layout, and the primary reason why is our condensing water, our cooling water. The supply of all of our water for fermentation, but also cooling water for the stills, is all ambient room temperature in our storage reservoir, our water dam. And so in the middle of winter here, it can get to 15 Celsius at a minimum. And during the summer, it can get up. The water temperature can get up to a peak of 32 degrees Celsius.
Wow!
And so that's it. That's all we use. That's all we've ever used from a condensing perspective. So really trying to maximise the surface area, the condensing efficiency to get that vapour to condense and copper contact as well. Like the way that this old double pot still set up, at least since the 1940s, is 100% copper. So there is so much contact time available and reflux inherently within the design itself that created this unique flavour profile. And to have that replicated in wash still and spirit still paired together, it's very unique.
Man,
absolutely wild. So you're basically fighting the environment. You just needed that extra condensation to fight the heat going on. Okay.
Yeah, so that's the old still. Now, if we move through with Beenleigh, it changed profile in the late 70s, early 80s. Went very much innovation at the time, going from these old historic double pots straight into double column still. So huge change in the flavour profile. And then from the early 80s through to 2004 was double column rum, and then from 2004 to today it's very much as per American whiskey bourbon doubler type setup, where we've got a beer column and then we've got the pot separately. So it's a double distillation process of a beer or stripping column, and then that goes to our pot.
So reading online, I'm seeing the words vat still. What does that mean?
So historically, a vat still was a wooden stave vat with the coils or hoops, and it would traditionally have a wooden or copper top on it. The easiest reference today is the Port Morant still, Versailles stills at Demerara. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I say, when you start to look in the history of what we do have available on this old vat still. Yes, it was wooden staves. We've got photos to show that, but we also know that in pre-World War II, late 30s, early 40s, that the vat, obviously the old staves, the vat timber pot was taken out and replaced with a copper boiler for the rest of the process.
Oh, okay, so there's no vat still being used anymore. That's gone.
No.
That lives in history. Okay.
Yeah, so far.
Cool. Well, unless Steve gets his druthers over here. Have you been mapping this out on the back of a napkin on any given lunch? Like how you can bring this back into production?
Numerous lunches. It's much debate and conversation around it. So just seeing if, how, what, who, when, what it would cost.
Yeah, the listeners can't see it for themselves, but every time you mention bringing this back to life, there's a cheeky little grin crosses your face and a little twinkle in your eye that I see the thing that you've got your hopes and dreams set on.
Yeah, it's definitely a piece of history and really unique. And the thing is, as I just described, our existing distillation process being that wash or beer column and then pot distillation, we don't do double pot distillation. So we don't produce a pure single rum, classification rum. And so that would be another avenue for the Beenleigh operations, is to put a second pot in to do double pot. And that's what we look at, is do we go down that avenue, or do we call back on our history and our roots and our tradition and look at what's sitting right in front of us and don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's in front of us. So
it's interesting for me listening where you're talking about this change in profile that occurred in the 80s, and then you've got the early 2000s where you implement another change, and now here in 2021, I believe it is. I could be wrong about that. But one of the questions that I've got is, as you're looking at the history of Australian rum, and as Beenleigh is known for a flavour at these different points, what's it like when you make that change? Was it a case in the 80s? And I was only 6 in 1980, but was there a period where Beenleigh drinkers were up in arms? Like, I'll never drink this again. I can't believe they've dared to do this. But then more recent history in 2004, with that change in there, how's all of that fitting in within Australian rum?
That's a great question. Now, if we look back, for example, I was saying that our master distiller, Wayne Stewart's been here since 1980, so over a span of 40 years. So he's a great resource for a lot of those changes. And ultimately it comes down to, in the last 40 years, there's been 5 different owners of this Beenleigh Distillery. So during that period and those eras of different ownership, there's been different influences, different perspectives and preferences. So whether it's the efficiency and volume, or whether it's high quality, low volume. So there's been a varied ebb and flow of rum style, preferences, production volumes. And in context, from the Australian rum side, if we switch across to another famous rum distillery here, Bundaberg, they were established 4 years later in 1888, and they've always been a very big, aggressive distillery operation, and they stick to what they know. They've now been owned by Diageo for 20 years. But when you look at side by side 2 different distilleries and how that profile differs, or how they may align together. Now, from a process perspective, what we do at Beenleigh with the wash column and pot distillation process is actually inherently an Australian rum profile. Bundaberg, and also the third major distillery here, CSR Piedmont, which stands for Colonial Sugar Refinery, and it was based right in the inner suburbs of Sydney, in Sydney Harbour. Their process was also wash column and pot. So, which all culminates back to the US whisky industry and that influence for a balance of efficiency and flavour profile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing to me, and Joshua led this earlier with his question, but in knowing the whisky industry and hearing the reasons for certain things occurring within the whisky industry, it's really intriguing listening to you talking about the exact same words that have controlled flavour and production and, volume. It's remarkable that it crosses industries the way that it does.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing. Like I regularly get asked, at least from the international community, what is an Australian rum? How do you categorise Australian rum? And that's the simplification is molasses, English style rum, wash column, then pot, Then when we get into maturation, then it would be large format vats and then barrels, or combination of either or. And that historically, over 130 plus years, 150 years, that is the way to categorise at least the three major producers that have stood the test of time. And that's us, Beenleigh, Bundaberg, and CSR Piedmont.
When I think of more modern, and again, I do apologize, I'm always going to revert back to my comfort zone of whiskey. But when I think of whiskey producers that incorporate both a pot and a column, it's usually the pot that distills the wash, and then the column that does the second distillation. And so I'm curious if there was a reason why the wash goes into the column first and then the pot. Is that, and I really do need to apologize for my ignorance, is that just inherent in rum when a combination of a pot and a column are used, or is that something that's more common to Australian rum when a column and pot are used?
Yes, so using the column first, it's really about efficiency and getting larger volumes through, in compared to a double pot distillation process, which obviously, like you look at your single malt whiskies, that by definition have to be double pot. And a lot of, if you look in the rum space, your Caribbean double retort, style distillation, versus anything in a column's inherently going to be a lot lighter flavour profile, less congeners. But it really comes back to efficiency and pushing volume through, and then taking that distillate and then putting it into the pot is to really concentrate and capture that essence that is there. And so, as I say, it really is a balance of efficiency and flavour profile. So the Beenleigh spirit that we've been making for the last 16 years, since 2004, here on the system, it's and I'm sure you guys will recognise this, and a lot of the feedback we get from, particularly out of the international community, is how different it is, how floral, how fruity, how heady essentially those flavours and aromas are, versus your traditional Caribbean or Guyanan Demerara type rums.
You, Steve, had clued me in to a 6-year-old Beenleigh bottled. Jason has the bottle now. See, I was going to incorporate Jason anyway. This one here, right? That 6-year-old. And so I purchased 2 bottles, one for me, one for Jason. Is that 2013, Jason?
Yeah. Yep. If I can get my light right, there you go.
What does it say there? Can you read that for us, Jason, so the listeners know?
Transcontinental rum line, Australia 2013, distilled in Australia in 2013, bottled in France in 2020.
So that is a US exclusive with the Transcontinental rum line portfolio. We have here in Australia, we're fortunate to get the Transcontinental 2015, which was more Europe, Singapore, and Australia availability. So I haven't had that, other than what's out the back in our vats, in our barrels.
That's very good. I can highly recommend it.
The Transcontinental liquid is fantastic, and what we see in this is more of we start to see the subtleties of a French oak influence, and versus our maturation here is largely American oak, ex-bourbon, but we are expanding into French oak maturation as well, and this has really been a highlight for us of what essentially secondary maturation, going from American oak to French oak, and then how it's presented to customers, and the feedback's been fantastic.
Yeah, I found it to be a wonderful rum. I was telling Jason before he had hopped on, I took it with me on vacation. My family went down to Disney, and I'm like, what bottle am I going to bring? So I brought the rum, and I got maybe 4 to 5 drams out of it, and then my wife and I agreed we should probably see how it tastes in a rum punch as well. So we got to enjoy it in a few different environments. The reason I bring this up is when I was doing a bit of research on the distillery, I saw something, and you touched on it earlier, that you have these large maturation vats that will mature your rums anywhere between 2 and potentially up to 15 years. And I'm curious, we talked about the distillation side of it. When it comes to the maturation side of it, is it your practice to first house the spirit in these maturation vats for a period of time and then put them into casks? Or are those two different maturation styles just that? Two different maturation styles for different products that you do?
So with that, here at Beenleigh, our maturation volume is essentially split 50-50 between the large format vats and ex-bourbon barrels. And inherently we don't have large volumes. We don't have a large stock. And I'm rather jealous of a lot of the other Caribbean distilleries that may have 20,000, 40,000, 100,000, 200,000 barrels at their fingertips. We've got, I think it's 1,200 bourbon barrels, and then the rest of the volume is in these large format vats. So again, when we go back to Australian rum provenance, what is an Australian rum? Again, historically, the large format vats has always been used in some context. And again, that comes back to, hey, we're an island in the middle of nowhere, geographically, to the rest of the world. So, and we don't have oak here. So the American oak is brought in, or European oak was brought in. And so just cost of goods, efficiency, it was a lot more cost effective to build large vats, versus importing all the individual barrels in. And so not only that, when you look at the English rum history, you look at the Navy rum, like the docks back in Deptford, and Navy rum globally around the world was always large format vats. So that's where that heritage and provenance comes from of the preference for using those vats. And this is what that we have a balance of, and it's not that we will specifically put a rum into vat or barrels. We can do one, and we don't have a preference to go from one to the other. And this is where it comes down to the maturation and blending aspect for our Beenleigh portfolio. We'll definitely allocate liquid to the vats. We definitely allocate liquid straight to barrel. We've got first, second, and third fill ex-bourbon. We do import the bourbon barrels directly out of the US. We have containers dropping every 3 months. I've actually got the next one coming in next week. But so with those fresh barrels, we do have them allocated in our portfolio, in our program of what we prioritise. For example, the Inner Circle overproof rum portfolio we have, that really is our flagship product, particularly for the overproof range. Sitting at 57.2 and 75.9. Well, that's our first fill bourbon barrels. That's a five-year maturation with a small volume of 10-year maturation.
It's a good strength, isn't it?
75.9% alcohol.
75.9. It just clocks over 152 proof.
Wow.
So coming back to the maturation side, when you look across not just rum in Australia, but you look across our whisky industry that we do have and have built in Australia, we look across the brandy and wine industry, that large vat maturation is it's across all spirits industries here historically. And more recently, because of our wine heritage and history here, there's actually quite a lot of large volume of French oak, hogsheads, barriques, puncheons available, mainly coming out of the wine and the fortified wine industry. So we do have these resources at our fingertips, and that's where we're exploring some more of these Australian fortified wines, some French oak influence. And so just trying to look at what we what we have, what we can do. And obviously there's rum industry influences out there that are doing full-term maturation in whether it be port, sherry, Madeira, red wine, white wine, etc.
It was actually the vats that I was going to ask my question about a moment ago as well. So Joshua beat me to the punch there. But, again, for us in whiskey, I feel like every question we've asked has started the exact same way. We don't know anything about rum. Let's talk about what we know. So if we're familiar with, the surface area contact from a bourbon barrel to then the surface area contact of a sherry butt, and we understand the interaction between the spirit and the wood, when you're talking these large vats, what type of volume are we talking? And then I can't imagine there's much of any surface area contact. So what are you seeing in terms of maturation? Must you necessarily leave it in the vat longer? So there's a few different aspects to that question.
That's fine. So with the vats here, we have the smallest volume. We have 21 9,000 litre vats. Then we have 17,000, 22,000, 55,000 and 65,000 litre vats.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's where in the last decade we tend to use the vats more of a blending, marrying type maturation where we will, it just creates flexibility for us to be isolating particular barrel groups and then pulling them from it and blending them and keeping them it just allows flexibility for us to have multiple blends available for our product portfolio, whether that's more of a pot heavier influence, whether that's more of a column lighter influence or a combination of the two, whether it's like I said, for the Inner Circle, which is our flagship overproof product, whether we're really pushing that back maturation in first fill bourbon as long as possible, then we, again, as I say, we'll marry that and blend that together. But when it comes to the large format vats, so particularly down in our distillery building, the heritage listed part of the site, we've got 4 vats that are 130 years old. There's not a lot we can do with them. There's not a lot we can do to them. We do have losses. That's inherent with the age that they are and the design of them. So we do typically keep our white rum, Beenleigh White, in there. So just in general for listeners, Australian Rum has a 2-year minimum age statement. And so with our Beenleigh White, we actually have a three-year age statement on it, and it sits in those oldest vats for 3 years. It doesn't get any colour or minimal colour influence. It definitely softens out. We lose the volatiles, and it really softens and mellows out in the timber. Those old vats, but we're really not seeing any colour influence. So through that 3-year term, like if you look at any of your Cuban style rums that are in essentially neutral or very light ex-bourbon barrels, there's very little carbon filtration that has to happen after that. Well, and that's what we term it. Essentially, it's drawing from the wine industry. It's minimal intervention. It sits there for 3 years. We do agitate it, but there's really no colour that we have to strip back out. Therefore, inherently the flavour that's there is what you get in the bottle.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense.
And then when we get to the larger vats, yes, that's there. There's other brands in Australia with their vats. They tick the 2-year box and the liquid moves on, and that's really a volume game. For us, that one of our vats is the 2007, which is the volume that we've largely exported into the European market, the independent bottlers. And so if you see the 2007 release available through various independent bottles, that is one vat that we have here.
Ah, okay.
And then one of the other vats where we're actually distilling whiskey at the moment, so something a bit different for us.
Yeah.
That's the next question, Steve. You're preempting the next question.
I'll shut up now and I'll wait for the next question.
Joshua, do you want to take this one? Do you want me to take it? Whatever the next question is.
You know what? I've been talking more than you, Jason. It sounds like you had a question on the tip of your tongue, so I don't want to take that from you.
I'm hearing about the Beenleigh single malt whiskey. How did that come to be? How are you working that right now? And what's that looking like for you all?
Yes, it's a great question there, Jason.
Thank you.
And now, at the end of the day, in the Australian whisky industry here, and this goes across again the spectrum of rum and brandy, we do have minimal rules. The 2-year maturation rule is largely the primary rule. There's no minimum, maximum size maturation vessel, etc. And then also single malt. There's no specific definition of what is or isn't a single malt whiskey in Australia. So as I recall back to saying that our process is a wash column and pot process. It's not double pot. So there's a bit of controversy. Is it single malt? Is it not? So I don't want to open a can of worms there, but we don't have mash tun, lauter tun equipment on site, so we do contract a brewery. Again, as I say, there's no regulations in Australia for whether it has to be done internal or you can do external beer or wash volume. So we bring the beer in. We did this first time back in 2016, 5 years ago, and then quite a famous brewery in northern New South Wales brought the beer in. Just went through that, as I say, that column and pot distillation, and then a lot of that volume was then shipped, tankered across to our sister site distillery, 23rd Street Distillery down in South Australia. It's about 1,800 kilometres distance from here. But in saying that, we just happened to tuck a few barrels away in the back corner of the warehouse. And lo and behold, 5 years later, in May it was, we released a 5-year whiskey, and just absolutely blown away. It was awarded a silver medal at the IWSC Awards earlier in the year. So it was more of an experimental project for us to see how because our state here, Queensland, quite tropical climate. It's not known in Australia, obviously globally, for a whiskey focus. We definitely are a rum community.
Sure.
So that single malt whiskey it's gone great. It's aside from the yeast profile coming through, it is a very, very light, very floral, very fruity whiskey, and it's quite different. It was 100% bourbon barrel aged as well. Yeah. And through as you, I'm sure you're aware, across the Australian whisky industry, there is a lot of leverage of the fortified wines, the ports, the sherries, red wine barrels. So we wanted to stay away from that. We stick to what we do best with our ex-bourbon, and and that's essentially keeping it simple, keeping it traditional as much as we are able to, and still call it single malt.
So first off, in your defense, the Penderyn Distillery in Wales started off bringing in their wash from the Brains Brewery in Cardiff, and their distillation process is a combination of a pot and a column. So and they're single malt. So I'd say that is too. But
you're checking the boxes.
Curious, I'm checking the boxes. But you mentioned the yeast profile. I know that you have your proprietary yeast for your rum. Did you give the brewery your yeast to produce the wash? So is the yeast the same whether it's your single malt or your rum, or are you using their yeast?
No, just utilising the beer or wash specification from the contract brewery. And so that was the previous, as I say, that was done 5 years ago. We now have none left. It's all gone. But our current program that we've just finished was with a alternative brewery, different beer source, different yeast, completely different profile. So we've an increased larger volume as well for us. So that's where we've had a dedicated program here for the last 8 weeks, and just been 100% focused on whiskey. Now we've just switched back this week to molasses and rum production, and so that's keeps things interesting for us.
So you just set this up as an experiment in 2016, and then didn't do it in 2017, 18, 19, or did you have an annual project, an annual experiment?
No. It's just we've just reviewed it.
Yeah. You're like, that was fun in 2016. Let's see what the future holds.
And so the bulk of the whiskey that we made here went to our sister site. They've subsequently released that under their brand. Gotcha. And it's sold out. So we've got traction in the market. We know the liquid's quality. We know the consumer demand's there for it. And so it's really a key business decision from the company owners to basically tell us to put the foot down and make more whiskey.
Wow. So do you think going forward then there will be a portion of your year that will be the single malt? You're not going to repeat in 2021 what you did in 2016, which is say like, let's circle back in 2026. Now you're going to actually commit on an annual, or if you don't want to commit, that's fine too.
That's all being reviewed at the moment based off the volumes that we've done, the efficiencies we've got through the distillery, the liquid quality, now really focusing on the maturation and how that's going to plan out, and ultimately what profile that product is going to present, at least in a minimum 2 years forward. And so we are reviewing whether we'll have an annual focus or commitment to whiskey. But inherently, all us here at Beenleigh, we're all rum focused, and that's what we do.
So now that you've said that, can I ask you one more whiskey question?
Absolutely.
So over those 5 years, having your American barrels on site and having your tropical climate, what was your angel share like over those 5 years?
I'd have to go back and look at the records, but in general, our angel share here averages between 5 and 6%. So that's standard for us. That's in the bourbon barrels. In our vats, it averages around 3%.
Okay.
Yeah. So I believe it would be up in the 25 to 28% total.
Yeah, but not too dissimilar to us here in Virginia.
Yeah.
Tropical climate, as we discussed with Virginia Distillery. Yeah, awesome.
This may be a strange question. Looking at your range online, I noticed, you've got a lot of products that are 40%, and I know you do Navy Strength as well, but there were a few instances where your bottlings are at 37%, 37.5%. And I know, Australia is kind of famous for draconian tax laws and such. And, I said it, you didn't, so you won't get in trouble. But my question is that for tax reasons? Is it for flavor reasons? Is it... I hope my question isn't too forward. And maybe it started off as tax reasons, and then you found out, this product works really great in cocktail programs and things like that. It's just these odd ABVs always intrigue me. So I'm curious what you have to say there. So
again, a great question. When we look again, aside from our 2-year maturation rule for aged spirits, one of the other criteria is a minimum 37% across all spirits. I know in the US and in Europe it's largely minimum 40% ABV.
Yeah.
We're 37 here, and it is largely related to the tax excise tax side. So at the moment we would be paying $88 a litre, so allow on pure alcohol, and it is, I think it's the third highest or second highest excise tax rates globally.
Yeah.
And in saying that, that's all spirits. So when you've got your large multinationals, say American bourbon companies, bringing their liquid into bulk into Australia and bottling it here in Australia, it's not bottled necessarily at 40. It'll be bottled at 37 or 37.5 because they can. So that's where, I'll go back to the bourbon industry. as a different perspective is some of the bourbon bottlings done in the US versus bourbon bottlings done in Australia. It's different liquid, it's different flavour profile, just with an ABV change, which largely comes back to the excise tax that's payable.
Yep, there you go. Yeah, I remember Eddie Russell at Wild Turkey talking about having to do that, and he had mentioned it was for tax reasons, just to make the bottle a bit more affordable.
Yes, so it's getting, yes, our excise tax is always an issue in the industry. And just on that, it's fantastic to see some news just overnight out of the UK that the government has frozen the excise tax over there. And it's something that the industry here has been focusing and lobbying the Australian government to do. So we'll see where that goes in the future. But the thing is, with looking at the craft industry in the last decade and pitching higher ABV, unique products to the consumer, there's definitely, as we know, particularly from the single malt whiskey, the cask strength whiskies, and now rum, we're really seeing that shift of higher ABV influence and demand for those products, and particularly for that raw, natural cask strength as is type product.
I wanted to switch gears a little bit, if you didn't mind. I had one. We always have a question we get out of here on, but I know I had at least one question before that. Hopefully you've got a bit of time.
Absolutely.
It's only 20 past 11 for the man.
Isn't that bedtime for you yet, Steve?
No, I've had my breakfast wrong. It's all right. I'm good.
So I've been sitting here, during the conversation, just sipping on Blacktop 50th. And what I love about what's the new iteration is now it's the Master Blender's Reserve, so it's the follow-up to the 50th. And my understanding is it 12 or 14% of the overall new special edition Black Top is Beenleigh, right?
Yes, I believe it ended up being around 6.8, 7%. Mitch Wilson and Ollie at Elixir can argue about that one, but I still have, I'm lucky enough to have the original sample bottle that Ollie sent out to me to us for that. And absolute privilege that to be considered by Ollie and Sukhinder and the group behind Black Tot to be considered, at that level across the rum industry to be included or considered to be included amongst the Black Top blend. Just amazing when you look at the rest of that. The Masters Blenders Reserve back label, you've got the Foursquare, Demerara, and everything else, Hampden that's on there. So just amazing to be in that same circle. So that's in the Master Blenders Reserve. It's a 2007 that's in there.
Oh, the vat that you were talking about, right?
So that was 10 years matured here before it was exported into Europe. So, 10-year tropical maturation, and now coming up to, I think it's between 2 and 3 years now, with our colleagues at E&A Shear in Amsterdam.
So you've had the 50th. I imagine you've had the Master Blenders Reserve.
Yes, if anybody's fortunate to do a side-by-side of the two, there is no comparison. They're almost polar opposites to me.
Wow.
Of the fruitiness that's coming through. And I'm not being biased to Beenleigh, but the fruity characters and profile that's coming through on the Masters Blender Reserve, it is so different to the 50th.
Well, and this is what I've heard from, not just from Ollie, but some friends who are living on the other side of the pond, because thanks to global logistics, that product is not yet here in the U.S. Where that'll come in January. But what I've heard over and over again is that the Beenleigh fruitiness is unavoidable. That it just rears its head. It makes itself known, and that's exciting to me. And so I'm so excited that you're in that blend, and I love what you said there, where you look at the back label and you feel like you're part of this bigger party. Is is that traditional in rum to be like, oh, that's awesome. They used our distillate in their blend. I think some single malt producers may be a little reticent to come out and just say that. And I wonder if that is just, hey, I'm in the party now. They're using my stuff.
No, as I say, it's a fantastic honour, and I think when you're looking at the black top releases, the Masters Blenders Reserve, I think when the ultimate purpose, I guess, of that product is paying respect to the Royal Navy rum. And that's when we historically go back into the Royal Navy tot, is there was Australian rum in there from both through World War I, World War II, right through to the 1960s. And so, as you know, there was some of that heritage, and that was part of the inclusion, and particularly from Mitch Wilson and his time out here in Australia and now in the UK with Elixir and Black Tot, is to see that potential influence of the Australian rum profile. And yes, it's Beenleigh, but really a great call out for our history, our provenance, what is Australian rum. And so, it's a fantastic to see that all come together. And as I say, with the way that they've designed the products range and moving forward, that essentially it's a perpetual blend. So there will be a percentage of Beenleigh moving forward in that blend as well.
I love that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And the final point I was going to make in our time together here and in talking about feeling honoured is we're about to put out a Single Cask Nation, Single Cask Beenleigh at 65.1% alcohol, which in our conversation here and talking about the difficulties that one faces with taxation in Australia, I feel even more fortunate that we're able to put out a 65.1, and it's now a 14-year-old that we're putting out in front of the nation. And so that's a huge honour and something that we're very excited about. And so just in speaking with you right now, I don't have a bottle of our own Beenleigh in front of me. I wish I would crack it and toast right now, but the good news is it has reached the United States, and it will be going out to the nation at some point in November. Given global logistics right now, we're really excited that it's actually in country.
No, that's fantastic, guys, and again, it's a great honour, and at the end of the day, there's simply not enough Beenleigh anywhere, particularly in the US. And with yourselves at Single Cask Nation, everybody needs more Beenleigh.
Yeah, I'm certainly searching it out, so I'm happy to have made the introduction.
Yeah, indeed. But we like to end our conversation with what's got you excited about the next year, 2 years, 5 years for Beenleigh. Like you had said, you're the new kid on the block here, with 2 years at the distillery. Obviously, you came in with the future in mind. So what has you excited about the future?
Oh, we've got lots of exciting stuff. Like just at the moment, we've got a couple of ferments down that are just ticking over 2 months or 8 weeks fermentation. So we're working on some long ferment, higher ester profile product at the moment. If we look back into a couple of months ago, earlier this year in March, we released a product known as Flood Rum. That was back in 2017. That was a rum that underwent a just over 4 month fermentation time. It was unplanned. It was unscheduled. There was a flood through the distillery again. But that product and the way that release has gone, it was a distillery exclusive here. And the awards that we've been very fortunate to win this year for it.
4 month maturation, 4 month fermentation, I mean?
127 days, 130-day fermentation.
Wow.
Crazy.
So that's 100% Cerevisiae yeast, and so having it sit on the lees on the yeast for that long really has pushed the ester profile, and it really starts to get into that particularly leveraging our fruity floral characters. We're really pushing into that Jamaican funk context. And so that's something we're working on right now, just absolutely waiting before Christmas to, once we hit the 3-month mark, is to get that liquid through the stills and see how it comes off both the column as a single column distillate and then the column pot process. And okay. It's potentially something there for us for an unaged overproof. Or we'll see where the liquid takes us. Anyways, and at the moment, what we've been working with our wonderful colleagues at Valliere, La Maison Valliere in Italy, and with La Maison de Whisky in France, is European and UK distribution of both Beenleigh and Inner Circle portfolios. So that there's a groundswell happening there. We've had the Valliere co-bottling releases with Luca, the 2006 and 2015. Very contrasting liquids there as well. But so we've got a lot happening at the moment. To look 2 years ahead, 4 years, 5 years ahead. Again, I go back to our head distiller, master distiller here. He been on the tools here for 40 plus years, and he's adamant that the best rum that Beenleigh is making is today. Right now. So it's just very exciting to see where that goes. And for us, we recognise from a continuous improvement process that if we've got any improvement to make, it's from the maturation side. It's from looking at our first fill, second fill, third fill wood policy, looking at other options, whether it's French oak, European oak, whether it's leveraging, as I say, the Australian fortified industry with the sherry or port barrels. Australia's famous for its red wine barrels as well. So there's a lot of movement there. Ultimately, and this is what comes off the leverage and the opportunity we've seen in the European market and with yourselves is how Beenleigh can execute a single barrel program. So that's something that we're exploring as well.
It sounds like everything's on the table. And that's a really exciting place to be as you look forward. Absolutely.
We've got a few blends and a few releases coming up, which is just to really showcase the components in these blends and to really showcase some of the little projects that have been occurring here over the last couple of years and different distillation styles. And not that we do agricole, but we've got something similar sitting away at the back of the warehouse that we're looking to use as a blending component. And so just really highlighting what we can do with and what we've got at our fingertips that basically until recently the world doesn't know about. And to that matter, if we look back some of the more recent history of Beenleigh, back in 2002, 2004, we were the IWC Rum Producer Trophy winner. And that holy grail is what we're focused on. That is that 5-10 year plan.
And don't forget your other plan of rebuilding that old still. I know you wanted to that or the double pot, but I think you know where your heart is.
Absolutely, it's like I say, we walk past it multiple times a day, and it's just it's just inherently in front of us, and, staring right back at us. It's a matter of what we do and when we do it.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Steve.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you for the invite, and thanks to the Single Cask Nation.
So the bit I was going to set up before the interview, which we touched on in the interview just a little bit there, there's no Beenleigh currently available in the United States. They have no distribution in the United States. It is available from other countries. It can be legally shipped here through a private purchase. But I really feel honoured that we have a Beenleigh, that we have a single cask that we're able to share with the online US component of the nation. And again, we're back to that spirit of collaboration that we've spoken about so many times before, where we want to shine that light back onto the distillery. And in this instance, even when it's not available in this country. But we hope that in the future, if Beenleigh does grace these shores again, that our nation members will say, oh yeah, I had that one.
Yep.
I'm familiar with that name. I'm going to revisit that. So, we're not afraid to do some heavy lifting. We're not afraid to put names out there. We're not afraid to represent, quote unquote, unknown distilleries that have 130 plus years of history and multiple iterations and multiple periods of flavor profiles, right? It's such a fascinating story with Beenleigh, and here we are getting to share it with the nation. That's real cool and a real honor.
Thank you. And that second part, the honor, is what really gets me, because, they don't have to give us the ability to use the name, but we have the ability to use the name. And in a way, that puts a little bit of pressure, I think, on us, because now we're ambassadors for that brand. However, it was nice, after the recording ended, Steve was saying, what you have there is some of our 2007 distillate, which is some of the nicest stuff I think that we've done. And he talked about what made that special, right? Using 30% of one kind of yeast and 70% of another kind of yeast to create this sort of slightly different, more heavier profile, like really big, heavy, earthy fruits. It was, just this glorious rum. So, the fact that we can use the name is awesome. The fact that he is the distillery manager saying, oh, I approve of this, I think that this liquid is great too, takes a little pressure off of our shoulders, right? This is one of the things that I love about collaboration with the distilleries we work with, because, we know what we like, we know what we want to put forward, but when we're collaborating, it's important to us that the distillery has something they want to put forward, and then we come to a consensus and we agree, like, oh yeah, that is excellent, and that specific cask is fantastic and works for our palate. So yes, let's do this together. I like that.
Well, it's that funny little question that pops up from time to time, and we've heard it a fair few times over our first decade here. But why would a distillery sell you their good stuff? Isn't a distillery just giving you their knockoff stuff, the stuff they're not quite as proud of? And we've always said, no, their name shares front of label billing along with ours, right? If we give you a crappy Beenleigh, it's a Beenleigh. If we give you a crappy Glenmurray, it's a Glenmurray, right? Like, those distilleries want us to put out the very best stuff. And here we are doing exactly that.
If we, using these examples and in any other distillery that we work with, it's good to keep in mind our name is biggest on the label. At the end of the day, it's on us if we put out a shitty whiskey or if we put out a shitty rum. It's not on the distillery. So, anyway.
Yeah, but we mean it when we say spirit of collaboration.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Like, it's not just, is that good enough? Is that good enough? Is that good enough? It's, here's some of our best. You want to put your name on that? And us saying, yes, we do, along with your name.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yeah.
So thanks to Steve. That was brilliant. He went above and beyond when he accommodated a time zone error and hopped on earlier, which was great. But meeting him for the first time and feeling like the conversation was easy, the questions were easy, the information coming from him was fantastic.
Yep.
And again, and I know our down there listeners keep hearing us say this, but I already mapped like how far is the Beenleigh Distillery from our friends at Backwoods. You know, how can we get to Yakandanda? As it turns out, it's not a straight shot. We either have to go north and then over west and then south, or we have to go south and then west and then north. So they're almost due west from one another.
How many miles?
But there's
or how many kilometers?
But there's a lot. Like, it's more hours than you would imagine.
Is there a plane from the Beenleigh Distillery to the Backwoods Distillery? I imagine those two distilleries have a route back and forth.
Yep. Yeah. Private helicopter.
PH. Yep.
Yeah.
pH balanced.
PhD.
Yeah. Private helicopter for the distilleries.
Well, we're not going to get more dad jokey about that. So let's bring this segment to an end and let's wake up the paper boy.
Extra, extra! Read all about it. Life story of Playboy Penny. Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it. Me and that Playboy in trouble again.
Before we hopped into this new segment, we'd ended our conversation off with this idea of a spirit of collaboration between us as independent bottlers and the various distilleries that we work with. And we have another spirit of collaboration that we're doing with the release. And actually, this is one that you took charge on. So I hope you might share with the listeners our collaboration with Selway Bitterroot and a conversation that you had with someone at that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Back in August, well, I'm starting at the end, as I'm prone to do. Let me start at the beginning. Listeners have heard the name James Foster mentioned early and often on this podcast. And James Foster is one of many members of my Whisky Society up in the inland northwest, which is eastern Washington, northern Idaho. And one of our very dear friends who's a part of that is Moscow Jim. and Moscow Jim is a good lad. And in retirement, he has really thrown himself into assisting the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation with a lot of their trail clearing activities to such a degree that many members of the Inland Northwest Whisky Society that I've been running now since 2004 will spend a week in the summer camping out in the Selway Bitterroot and clearing trails over the course of a day, then gathering around the campfire in the evening and pouring some of the most top shelf whiskey you can get your hands on. And so that includes a very dear friend, Carl England, and many other people. I'm not going to start naming names or I'm going to be here all day. But one of the things I started talking to Moscow Jim about was the idea of doing a collaboration where, on one hand, we could raise money for the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation, but also give them a dedicated bottling for pouring at that campfire when they're out there for that week. And Moscow Jim was totally on board with the idea. He put me in touch with Alyssa Pearson, who's at Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation. We're about to hear from Alyssa in just a second to talk more about this, put more leaves on these branches. But it was so exciting. You and I don't sit around designing whiskies. Like we like the idea. We certainly love what John Glazer's all about with Compass Box and kind of what he puts out there. Our friends at Douglas Lang have done some whiskey designing. But normally you and I come along, we're identifying single casks are worthy of a bottle, and as we mentioned earlier, worthy of our label. Yeah. We've got this Croftengea here that has so many outdoor qualities, wilderness qualities, campfire qualities, that this screamed to be part of this collaboration.
Yeah.
With all of that said, in August, I made a trip out to Moscow, Idaho, hence Moscow Jim. He's not a Russian. He's in Moscow, Idaho. And so I made a trip out, and Alyssa Pearson came up from Boise, where she's based. And I think she'd actually been in the Selway Bitterroot in Montana before coming over to Moscow. And she and I sat down, we had a conversation, and we opened the first unofficial bottle of this Croftengea. So here's the chat, and then it goes into a little bit of a tasting as well. And then we'll come out of that in a wee bit. So we're sitting here with Alyssa. Hello.
Hi. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
From the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation.
Correct.
In Moscow, Idaho. You and I are sitting in Moscow, Idaho.
We are. Yeah, we are in a beautiful whiskey cellar, enjoying some company and whiskey and talking about SBFC.
Yes, we are. Moscow Jim has come through and done a solid for us. This has been great. Very quickly, what's your role with this Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation, or as I like to call it, SBFC. A little bit easier.
Well, and I think in the collaboration that we've done together, the label has SBFC, but then the full name underneath it.
You are correct, yes. It does have the whole package.
So talk to us about the Selway Bitterroot Foundation. Just talk to us about Selway Bitterroot. What is it? Where is it? Give us the lay of the land, literally.
Literally, yeah. Well put. So we work together. Our organization works together with the Forest Service to help steward, meaning manage, maintain, take care of the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness and the Frank Church Wilderness. So the Selway Bitterroot is the northern section of that wilderness area, and it spans through Idaho and Montana. And the Frank Church Wilderness is just in Idaho. And collectively, those two wildernesses are just about 4 million acres. And so it's quite a large chunk of land that requires, a lot of work to maintain and provide access to. And so that's what we do, among other things. We do some really fantastic education programs, and we work to give guidance and support to college students who are looking to get into conservation and join the Forest Service, become wilderness rangers, get involved in conservation advocacy for our wild places. So we try to give them a leg up and provide education programs.
So explain to me a little bit. I'm trying to get my head around, it's always the same question for me in America. Who owns the land? Who's working the land or clearing the land or maintaining the land? How does that work? You're nodding your head like you've heard this question before, but it's always strange to me who claims what and then who takes charge of something.
Absolutely, yeah. And quite frankly, it's pretty convoluted.
Okay.
But, a lot of our wild lands are public lands. They're public lands for public use, and that means that, it's up to the public to help manage and maintain them. Now, wilderness, capital W wilderness, are designated areas by Congress. Congress designates these places as wilderness with a capital W. And those places are stewarded by the Forest Service, as well as partners such as the SBFC, who provides support to the Forest Service because, here in Idaho and Montana alone, over 4 million acres, they can't do that on their own. Yeah. They have so many other things to do. So that's a brief overview of how it works.
Okay. And so then SBFC receives donations? I'm not even sure if I'm allowed to ask this question, but it receives federal funding, it receives grants. What's coming into the coffers that allows that foundation to operate?
Yeah, great question. We are a nonprofit organization funded predominantly by grants as well as by the Forest Service. And our biggest thing is donors, volunteers, people who provide support for us so that we can do these programs and steward these areas that many people hold very dear to their hearts.
Okay. And then how did Selway, Bitterroot and Frank Church come together? When did that happen? And I'm even curious, who is Frank Church and how did he get his name on a wilderness?
Yeah, another great question. You're chock full of them. Thanks. So initially, a very fun fact for you and a great thing that we are doing this whiskey here and now is that SBFC is celebrating 16 years of wilderness stewardship this year. So for the past 16 years, I know it's fantastic. So for the past 16 years, we've been stewarding wilderness. And I use stewardship as just a general umbrella term for a million different things that we go and do: wilderness monitoring, trail clearing, trail building. And we send people into the remote backcountry, literally hundreds of miles from anywhere, to help ensure access is provided. So we actually started as the Selway Bitterroot Foundation. We started with a group of folks up in Missoula, Montana, who wanted to provide stewardship access to this area. Now, there's a lot of history, and I won't go too much into it, but essentially there's large swaths of land in Idaho that are wildly remote. And so initially they were called the Idaho Primitive Area. And eventually Congress passed laws, regulations to turn them into capital W wilderness. And a huge champion of a large chunk of Idaho wilderness was Frank Church. And he was a congressman who did so much to advocate for wild places. And so the Frank Church Wilderness was initially the River of No Return Wilderness because the Salmon River runs through it and its nickname is a River of No Return. And then Frank Church got his name on it because to honor the work that he had done.
That's very cool. I like hearing, obviously, in a time of some environmental issues, situations. I'm thinking about the drought in the West. I'm thinking about the forest fires in the West. I'm thinking about some lands being reopened to drilling or mining. To think of a congressperson who was a champion of the land and the wilderness seems to harken back to an earlier time, maybe a simpler time.
Truly. And I misspoke. He's a Senator Frank Church. So please excuse that.
Well, the good news is you're speaking to a Scotsman, so they're all just DC folk to me, so no worries.
But you're totally right, and it really is fascinating, the compromises that have to be made between different industries and wilderness in order to get wilderness to be designated. And essentially, the goal of this wilderness is just to preserve these places that, are so pristine and so remote and incredible. The craggy rocks, giant trees who, haven't been looked upon by people in generations, and really pristine waterways. And that's a really huge thing in the wilderness is these waterways that feed into, the oceans. They feed the Columbia. We have a huge salmon spawning area in the Frank, and they're really incredible ecosystems. And it's, our goal to protect and preserve them for generations to come, and hopefully ensure that area of land stays beautiful and pristine and remote for, as long as we can help it.
Well, and obviously here we are sitting here with this collaborative bottling where you're talking about issues that are not only near and dear to my heart and Joshua's heart, but also to the nation's heart. And for us, the nation is Single Cask Nation, but obviously there is the nation beyond that as well. You've allowed me two tenuous links here, one of which is clean water, and obviously in Scotland we have a saying that today's rain is tomorrow's whiskey. And so clean rain, clean water is important to us. But you also said something a moment ago that if we were smarter and if we were savvier and if we were deeper with our marketing dollars, we would tell you that we plan to have this 16-year-old Croftengea to mark your 16 years. But if you want to talk about sheer happenstance, which is my favorite kind of stance, we just got incredibly lucky that the number on our label, the 16, matches your 16. But should we open this and give this a little taste together?
I think so. It's been staring at me for a while now, so I'm pretty eager. And I am eager, too, to identify some tasting notes. You and I chatted about it earlier.
We did.
And I'm really thrilled about having this particular cask because of its tasting notes. They seem to really resonate with what we're all about at SBFC and the wilderness and the forest. So I'm pretty excited.
Brilliant. Let's page Moscow Jim, who was a part of this as well, and we'll bring him in for this opening.
Fantastic.
Jimbo! So one of the first things for me is this pickled onion note. We just talked about this earlier. We were having a Craigellachie together, and there was a very subtle pickled onion note. This, for me, with the Croftengea, this Highland peat, for me, delivers this Funyun note. But I think it can also lend itself to a certain earthiness. And again, previously when you and I were talking, warm earth can become a very real thing in some of these whiskies.
Yes, to me, I definitely get a nose of, it's, challenging to describe what a hot Idaho day is like to your listeners, but very much that hot earth smell, a little boggy, a little dusty.
I like it. I'm definitely getting it. Almost even I'm thinking about you talking about clearing the trail and thinking about someone's dusty leather boots getting warm as well.
Yes, absolutely. That dusty leather boot and that warm tree bark scent. Wow.
That's your first time tasting it.
That is. That's incredible.
So you're coming in here. We are 51.2% alcohol. So for the chaps on the Palouse and Mandy, who has been out and cleared brush as well, we're all cask strength fans. The higher the better. 51.2 at 16 years of age is going to lend itself. It's going to lend a certain softness to the experience. But for anyone coming from a beer background or a wine background, 51.2 is still a real ABV. We've tasted things in the 60s and 66, and so 51.2 has a softness that allows us to explore the flavors in there. So now you've had your wow moment, and you take a second sip, and Joshua and I, the nation, texture really drives us. And so getting that mouth coating quality of it is always important to us. And when I took my sip a moment ago, it's the mouth coating nature of it that I really love. But now you've had another sip, flavors coming through for you on the palate?
Yeah, a lot of flavors that are coming through is a very smoky, very, very smoky, sort of, s'mores over the campfire. There's a tinge of sweetness, but it has that smoky feeling on the back of your throat.
How's the strength for you? Because I know you are one of those beer and wine people that I just talked about.
I am. I'm a plebe when it comes to whiskey drinking. But oh gosh, it's fantastic. I could totally picture myself after a long day out on hitch on, clearing trail, sitting down, putting my feet in the cool alpine lake or creek and, enjoying a handful of these to dull the pain of...
Forget your ibuprofen, forget your Tylenol,
Yeah,
bring out a few of these.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing that we always say to people is we bottle it natural cask strength, but go ahead, add drops of water to it as you see fit. As you're sitting next to that fresh running river, stick a drop in it. You're not going to catch anything too bad from a single drop. Just for the record, Jason is not a biochemist. Jason is not a microbiologist.
Just for the record, please filter all of your water that you get out of the backcountry. I can attest from experience that is really crucial. But once you filtered or boiled it, add as much as you want.
Glad we got the disclaimers out of the way. And then on the finish, maybe even a little bit of white pepper, just as it clears through the finish there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I really love that. And one of the things for us in selecting this cask for the collaboration was with the outdoors very much in mind. What would it be like to drink this next to a campfire at the end of a day? What would it be like drinking this next to some warm trees, some dusty trail? Like, that was important to us. And so I think hitting that nail on the head and getting your seal of approval on this as well is really very cool. You're enjoying the experience?
I am. It so complements what we do out in the wilderness, and I'm so thrilled.
Well, let's do a little cheers, and this is to the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation.
Yes. Cheers to you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Alyssa. So before we get out of here, one more thing is this collaboration would not have happened without Moscow Jim.
Yes.
Jim Heidelberger. We talk about him in the podcast. He's a great supporter of the nation. He's a Craigellachie guy. And we often talk about him as a Craigellachie guy. But he's also an SBFC guy. And could you talk a little bit to his involvement over there?
Absolutely, yes. Jim is on our board and is truly one of the most fantastic advocates for SBFC. I genuinely don't know where we would be without his support. He is such a fabulous human, and is also spearheads at least one volunteer project annually, lovingly labeled Whisky in the Woods, where folks from Moscow and the Palouse go out to the Selway or the Frank with their whiskey and do some trail clearing, drink, probably more than they should, and have a blast. And so between his active volunteerism and his involvement on the board, he has done so much. In fact, he has put together some really fantastic SBFC whiskey glasses that we are drinking out of currently.
We are.
And he's spearheaded so many projects, and I'm just truly grateful for him and making this happen.
It really makes my heart sing to hear the way you talk about Moscow Jim. I've known him now for 19 years, and we've been on a whiskey journey together. We have celebrated together. He has been in my Palouse Whiskey Society from the very beginning, and he's been a huge supporter of that. To be able to bring together two of his great loves, SBFC and the nation, really writ large, whiskey, is so good. And the fact that you speak about him in the same glowing terms that I speak about him, I'm just so honored to know him and love him, and I'm glad that we're here celebrating him while he's still alive. He hasn't gone anywhere. He was just here filming us a second ago. I'm really glad we can celebrate both him and SBFC with this.
And Single Cask Nation.
And Single Cask Nation is right here.
Absolutely.
For those looking for this, it will be $160 per bottle, which fits beautifully with our rubric of $10 per year of maturation. But in addition to that, $20 from every bottle sold will go to the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation. And we are very excited to have that type of direct collaboration and to be able to feed some money into a very worthy cause, outdoor, nature, health of the planet. We wish you all the success, continued success with what you've got established with SBFC.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to to hear feedback from everyone who gets their bottle. And, for any of you who are out here in the West or who decide to make a trip over, we would love to have you on a volunteer trip to come out and experience the wilderness that our good buddy Moscow Jim talks so fondly about. You are absolutely welcome to visit our website at selwaybitterroot.org. We're also on social media at Selway Bitterroot. And if you have any questions or want to learn more, please visit our website and feel free to shoot me an email. I'm on there.
So once again, Alyssa, cheers to this collaboration. Cheers to your ongoing success. Cheers to Moscow Jim. Cheers to the members of the nation going out and supporting this collaborative bottling. And cheers to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We're going to go drink some more whiskey together.
Let's go drink.
Cheers again.
When you brought this collaborative idea to me and you explained, it's my guys up in Idaho and they do this
guys
thing.
And gals.
Guys and gals. And they do this thing with this Selway Bitterroot and this guy, Frank Church, and blah, blah, blah. And you were going on and on. And
it's a lot of words. Moscow Jim, Carl England. It's not spelled like the country.
But all I heard was charitable collaboration, and it was an instant yes for me. And I felt stupid not knowing what Selway Bitterroot was. So I never asked. And so it was so nice to hear this conversation between you and Alyssa, because all of my questions, Jason, were answered.
Well, and certainly that was the goal of talking to Alyssa as well. Even, eagle-eared listeners will have realized that in my introduction, I didn't actually give Alyssa her job title. And in the interview, I just left her to convey her job, her title, her responsibilities. And I'm still not coming out of the interview going to talk about it. So, but she was very cool. She stayed for we had the 100th meeting of our Whisky Society.
Oh, right.
Because of COVID, it had actually been delayed since January of this year. And we'd actually gone on and had 2 more meetings after the 100th. And so we kind of backtracked a little to celebrate the 100th and just had a blast. So the thing about the Crofty is that it's got that little bit of pickled onion that I always think of as being present in Lechig.
Yep.
And to get a 16-year-old Crofty that immediately makes me think of Lechig, we're on to a winner. So
I need to throw this in there. There's something about Croftengea, Lechig, and some younger Craigellachie. I don't know what they are, but those 3 distillates I can often confuse, and it's because of that pickled onion note. Those, sometimes Funyuns, that just seems to tie those 3 distillates together in some way, shape, or form. And I'm always so attracted to those distillates because of that note.
Given what you're saying there about that pungency, that pickled onion component, we don't often do this, but would you mind if I read through the tasting notes for this?
I know I wouldn't mind. I think our listeners would love it. Our listeners love hearing tasting notes. We need to do this more, so please.
All right.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Yeah. And I know you've just had the tasting that Alyssa and I did, but here's what you and I came up with.
Yes.
In addition. So the colour is reflective gold. And then the nose opens with a delightful pungency. Parenthetical comment, Funyuns, onion bagels, and pickled onion crisps with a hint of wild garlic around the edges. Close parentheses. But dig deeper and a softer side emerges. Parenthetical, blanched almonds, melted toffee, and warm banana bread, which is one of my favourite things on earth.
That banana bread note, yes. Go on.
Right? Close parentheses. Along with a certain, favourite word of mine, fecundity.
What did you just call me?
Comment.
Another parenthetical.
Parenthetical comment. Fresh shoots, warm earth, that kind of thing. And then that closes the parenthetical comment, but then in italics, could easily be mistaken for Lechig in a blind tasting.
There we go.
And blind tasting, what a great component of our of our episode today as well, right? Back to where we started everything.
Yeah.
The palate is oily and warming with buttered shortbread, fresh sourdough bread dipped in a combination of extra virgin olive oil and fresh cracked pepper. One of my favourite things to actually put on my kitchen counter as I'm preparing dinner of a night, and just dip in that and just munch it while making dinner. Hints of leather boots. Then a discernible campfire ashiness as it transitions towards the finish. And then that finish, moderate to long with more butter shortbread, maybe snickerdoodle cookies now, yellow or citrus popsicles, more cracked pepper, and a campfire ashiness. And then a comment, which is not on the label because the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation logo is on the label
right.
to show the collaboration. Yeah. But the comment for me is one for pouring next to the campfire after a long day of clearing brush. That is hyper specific. And I know next summer when all my friends and more volunteers besides are out clearing brush, I know this will be a wonderful reward for them at the end of the day.
It was so great hearing you reread those tasting notes. Right, I have my little sample bottle over here, and you and I will be doing a tasting video for it because the Croftengea is going to be released alongside our Beenleigh.
Indeed.
And that will go on sale November 4. So this episode drops November 3. So if you're listening to this, come November 4, if you're on our mailing list, fantastic. You'll receive the links to be able to purchase the Beenleigh and the Croftengea. If you're in our Facebook group for Single Cask Nation, members only, you'll find the links there. And I think the prices are pretty spot on. We've got for our 14-year-old Beenleigh at 65.1% alcohol. It's a big boy, but I'll tell you, it doesn't drink like 65.
No,
it's so luscious. Oh my gosh. That one is $150 a bottle, and then this Croftengea will be $160 a bottle. However, like you'd said, $20 of each bottle goes to the Selway Bitterroot Frank Church Foundation. And this is going to be slightly unusual. We are selling these as one bottle per person. However, you can get one of each. So you can still come away with two bottles. It's just not two of each.
Yeah, a 14-year-old rum and a 16-year-old peated Highland. It's a fun little combination for the fall turning to winter.
Not too shabby. Shaggy.
Brilliant. And I'll also say, the folk at Selway Bitterroot have been so patient. We have been working on this collaboration for over 2 years. And we didn't foresee a global pandemic getting in the way, and we didn't foresee tariffs getting in the way, and we didn't foresee global logistical issues getting in the way. And so there have now been a couple of summers where they've been excited to pour this on the trail. And instead it's been not quite yet, but now, November 4. When will then be now? November 4.
And of course, that is at noon Eastern Standard Time is when that'll go on sale. So just keep that one not in the back of your mind, but in the front of your mind. If it's in the back of your mind, you may miss out. So keep it in the front of your mind. Keep November 4 at the ready.
And released to US-based members of the nation. If you are international and these are of interest to you and you have a friend in the United States, you are welcome to purchase and send to the friend. How the friend gets your bottles to you is between you, them, and the bedpost. But Where there's a will, there's a way, Joshua.
That's true. Where there
I
is
think it was
will.
Shakespeare who said that. I think that's the will of that, is Will Shakespeare.
I thought it was Shakespeare that just said, "Get her done."
You're thinking of Shakespeare the Cable Guy.
Shakespeare the Cable Guy. Not to be confused with the Cable Guy from Big Lebowski, who says, "I am expert. I'm here to fix Dinah Cobble. I'm expert."
In closing out the news segment, I just want to add that the US retail release number 8 entered the country. If you listen to this in November, it entered in a couple of weeks ago, which finally, praise the heavens, here we are talking about the patience shown by the Selway Bitterroot folk, and here's people waiting on the 8th retail release showing great patience as well, as we worked with global logistics to bring that in. But the thing I'll say here is keep an eye on Instagram, because Elijah is going to do more banter about the barrel episodes where we will talk about a couple of the US retail release number 8 bottlings at a time. And that'll be a really fun conversation. The other part is we'll soon be hearing from Jess on the banter about the barrel episodes as she discusses ROW number 3 releases. So we've got a lot of whiskey out in the world. There's nae doubt about it.
The other thing I wanted to say about this retail release number 8 is it's about to get some of the broadest distribution in the States.
That's good to hear.
I'm looking at the allocations list here, and with previous releases, we were in maybe 18 states, maybe 20, maybe 22 states. We're now in about 28 states with this release. And
that's very, very nice to hear.
And as we get more information, we'll start releasing that. I don't want to start announcing this state and that state, because some states may take a month or two to bring it in. It's October, November, December, and distributors have basically stopped buying in product. They're busy trying to focus on selling all of the product that they ramped up purchases on to get out. So rather than go state by state, just know we're in more than half the states in the country, which talk about proud and honored. That is just amazing, and I want to thank our importer, Impex Beverages.
Absolutely.
Of course, and all of our distributors, all of our state distributors that support us, and all of the shops and bars that have been supporting us and been ambassadors for us. It really is an honor that our name would be on the tip of your tongue.
Yeah. Just to highlight just a few things here, there's a private cask pick going to the Wine Exchange in California. There's a private cask pick going to the Barrel Thief in Seattle.
Yep.
And then we've got the Wolf Island collaboration that we've done with Greg and Trevor and Alphonse and the rest of the team at the Water of Life film. That's our second collaboration there. And we've gone with a vatting of 6 casks from an undisclosed island distillery. And you've been pouring that. Elijah's been pouring that. The feedback has been out of this world. And I can't wait for dedicated listeners, fans of the nation, fans of the Water of Life film, to get their hands on that bottling.
Yeah, Elijah had said he had done a tasting recently, a big festival, and he had said that of all the bottles on the table, the Wolf Island was the only one that got emptied. People just kept on coming back. People were telling their friends, "You've got to taste this," and it just went away. So the fact that it's getting such a good response makes me happy that we've got 1,600 bottles to spread around the country. So you'll find that on store shelves, and if you see a bottle, well, look behind it, see if there's a second one, and grab 2.
Yep. See a bottle, buy a bottle.
Yep.
Or 2.
Yep.
Excellent. So let's wrap up the news segment of that. That's a lot of ground to cover, which there's a lot of whiskey floating around right now with the Single Cask name on it, which is very cool after a long, dry summer.
So with our intro behind us, with our interview with the wonderful Stephen Magarry, who we thank again for coming on and being a guest of the podcast and for collaborating with us as independent bottlers, we want to thank you. And then we had this long news segment with Alyssa from Selway Bitterroot, who we have to thank yet again.
Indeed.
We don't have time to do an email or anything like that. However, we do have some emails to read. But I want to use this opportunity to remind people that November is here, which means we want you, the listener, to start compiling some questions for our annual mailbag episode, which is really right around the corner. So compile your questions, email them in. You can email us questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com. You can always send us a Facebook message through, just go to the Facebook search bar, One Nation Under Whiskey, and you can message us through there. You can message us through Instagram. We are at One Nation Under Whiskey. And we, of course, are on Twitter at One Nation Whiskey. So if you got a question for us and you want it for the bigger mailbag episode where we kind of we tend to dig a bit deeper there.
We do.
Would you agree with that? Yeah.
I do.
Then you can send a question in for that. If you have maybe a lighter question that you want answered between then, you can email us one of those questions as well. So
yeah, when it comes to the mailbag episode, it is one of the episodes we look forward to every year. Any question is on the table. You want to ask us about doing the podcast, you want to ask us about life in the pandemic, how it's changed our traveling, what the company looks like 10 years in as opposed to when we started. Like, everything's on the table. We'll decide if you've stepped too far in your question and we simply won't answer it. But go for it. Ask, God, if you want to talk Kilhoman, we'll talk Kilhoman as well. Everything's on the table. Really, really surprise us with the sheer quality of your questions. I love receiving them.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't need to send us a large quantity, but we do prefer good quality.
Girth over length.
Oh, is it that way? All right.
I know you've been cursed in the other direction. Do you want to say it's always the penis with you?
You just did, so there we go. Jason, it has been an absolute pleasure.
An absolute joy, and I will take no further questions at this time.
Very good. Either will I. Thank you, as always, for your banter, for your wit, for your good question asking, and I will see you this time next week.
I'll be there.
Or you'll be square.
Cheers, listeners.
Cheers.